Hey everybody, I thought I'd give a quick intro video for a couple of reasons. One, I'm at Lakeside Retreats here where the Mind Under Matter Campout Festival is going to be September 9th through the 11th. The sun's coming down, so I thought I'd make a quick video. My friend who is on the show today, Martie Haselton, is going to be over there with a bunch of other scientists through the weekend. Friday through Saturday, science talks all day long, still lining up a whole bunch of people. She's going to be talking about the kind of evolutionary mismatches with mating in the modern world. Just booked Dan Ariely. If you're a science fan, you've probably heard of Dan Ariely. You've probably heard him, seen, say, his TED Talks or heard him a bunch on NPR or whatever. Really big best-selling author out of Duke, lining up a whole bunch of people, including scientist friends, people you've heard on the show before, some people that you haven't, a whole bunch of cool concepts, and getting very excited here. And there's, if you look over there, if you're watching on YouTube or Spotify, or wellness area will be over there. There's a sauna in the background, and you can't really see, I guess. And there'll be yoga classes and things like that. So you can have some science and some woo. There's going to be stand-up comedy over at the other end of the lake. So whole variety of things to check out, lawn games and stuff over in this other kind of peninsula area. And looking forward to it. Go to mindunderpod.com to learn more about that. Also, man, ever since I moved, I keep on screwing up recordings in some fashion or another. And this one, I screwed up. I selected it keeps on deselecting the proper microphone for some reason. So my editor, Matt McCool, did a nice job trying to make it sound as good as possible. And you'll get used to it after a couple minutes. It's not a big deal, just like when I had to do this last time and said it wouldn't be a big deal, and it wasn't. But I just need to make announcements like that just for any first-time listeners so that they know that typically my audio quality is better than that. I have all sorts of sticky notes on my monitor and camera and everything else now, so this will never happen again. Going to be doing a lot more in-person interviews all through the summer as well to improve the video and audio quality just generally, and really looking forward to that. Looking forward to putting these out more regularly. I actually missed last week's episode for the exact same reason, and we decided to scrap it because my buddy Cole Marta is actually coming for a visit. So we're going to record on this lake stage instead, which will be cool, and do it in person. And so we just decided that would be for the best anyway. But yeah, getting back into a weekly schedule again after the move and putting together a festival and all of the things that come along with it. Super excited to get here. We are back on the regular schedule. Next week's going to be Michael Garfield. I think that will make him his fourth appearance or something like that this 8 years. So he's been on as many times or more than anybody. Maybe he has the record. And Marlene Zook coming up, going to be talking about some animal behavior. She was in the first year of the show. Talked about her amazing book, Riddled with Life. She has a new book out, so check that out. And enjoy today's episode.
Are we?
Yes.
Where are we?
Here.
Why are we here? Not entirely clear. We are misfits thrust into existence by random chance, with no hints at all as to how we're supposed to make sense of it all. It's immensely bizarre. Here we are.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Here We Are podcast today. Special episode. We got one repeat guest and a new guest today. I love these. I just started having multiple guests on once in a while, and they always make for a fun dynamic. So I'm very much looking forward to this episode. My guest, she's been very first guest on the Here We Are podcast nearly 8 years ago. Been on a couple times since. Martie Haselton is joining us today. Hey, Martie. And brand new guest to the show. Been working with Martie on a couple things lately that are relevant to things going on in the world today. Jaimie Krems is joining me today.
Hello.
Hey, Jaimie. So first off, Martie, assume this is someone's first time listening to Here We Are. Can you introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Martie Haselton. I'm a professor at UCLA, and I'm an evolutionary social scientist. So I'm sort of my inspiration spans multiple disciplines. I reference evolutionary biology a lot in order to figure out what we might expect about human social behavior. So I'm sort of bridging between biology and social science. And that's me.
All right. Jaimie, introduce yourself to people.
Hi, I'm Jaimie Krems. I'm an assistant professor at Oklahoma State in the Oklahoma Center for Evolutionary Analysis, or OCEAN. And most of my work uses evolutionary tools to try and understand our social psychology. So I guess the quick way to put it is I want to understand human nature.
Fantastic. So I wanted to, abortion's the big issue right now. We don't need to make the whole episode about it or anything, but there's so much stuff. Obviously the Supreme Court decision has everyone very fired up. And I was talking with someone, several people now are like, well, everyone's just in their same echo chambers and they're saying the same things over and over again. And I'm like, I don't think that's true. I actually think that there's a whole lot of various factors and interesting things that are that can explain a lot of what's going on that people aren't privy to. And that's a lot of what this show is all about. I basically never talk about the news on this show, but this is a particularly important and interesting topic. And I know that you guys have some interesting takes on it. And so I don't know the best way to go about this because, again, I think an easy way to go about this is just to assume no one's ever seen the Here We Are podcast before and doesn't know all of the evolutionary concepts that we've built in over the almost 8 years. And so maybe kind of starting with some basics and then building up basics about evolution and mating behavior, and then building up to how that then kind of applies to humans' perception in our social lives, and then how that gets expressed culturally and what that might have to say about things happening today.
Sure. Yeah.
Sounds easy, right?
Yeah,
easy.
That's like, yeah, that's too easy.
And keep it under 45 seconds. All of that, go now.
Yeah. Jaimie, do you want to start?
Oh, please go for it. You're Martie Haselton.
Okay, I'll go for it. All right, I'll try. Why do we care what other people are doing, right? So where does our sense that what other people are doing is or is not okay? If it pertains to other people's mating behavior and they're doing it, across the country, why do we care about that? Why do we want to legislate anything about that? From an evolutionary perspective, we don't do things, or we have an evolved appetite to do things that didn't benefit us in terms of our reproduction or survival in the ancestral past. And so, what is it about other people's mating behaviors that could impact our own ability to reproduce? and the currency is all reproduction. It's reproductive success. And so I shouldn't care what other people are doing in their bedroom. What I should care about is what I'm doing in mine, and, who I'm attracting as a mate, and, what I'm doing to help my offspring. But we've seen a lot of people sort of having very strong attitudes, very, very strong attitudes about what other people are doing in their mating lives. And so that's...
And I would say just the interest generally, like we like
That's
thinking
true.
about, like, well, these French people are more flamboyant and promiscuous, and what's going on in Thailand? What's that about? And then these burqas, what's happening there? It's a big topic. Just mating in different cultures is
Right.
something that seems to engage everyone, and it is very strange from some sort of selfish gene perspective.
Right. And when we talk to other people, a lot of the times, when we do what we call gossip, a lot of times it concerns other people's mating behavior. So one possibility is that our morality does not reflect sort of like first principles, like, sanctity of life, but rather it reflects us wanting to engineer the world in such a way that it benefits the strategy that we're trying to pursue. And so people vary in how sexually restricted they are, meaning that they are more or less open to casual sex in essence. And some people are like, casual sex is fine. Casual sex is actually great because I want to pursue my career. I want to delay reproduction or maybe not do it at all, which we can decide in the modern era now that we have the ability to control reproduction. Whereas we thought we did. We did have the ability to control reproduction. Right. So I just got totally distracted by that point because it's kind of upsetting.
You were about to say,
Jaimie, do you want to rescue me? This is your time to chime in. Yes.
So if the coin of the realm is fitness, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a mystery why I should care what other people are doing in their bedrooms or Planned Parenthoods. But it turns out their sexual strategies and ability to pursue them can affect my fitness. And particularly if I'm one of the restricted sexual strategists that Martie was talking about, well, then I'm going to perceive other people's sexual freedoms as threats. So if I am a young woman, I get married very early. I have quite a few kids starting very early with my monogamous partner. Well, other women and their promiscuity and their ability to have sex with people, including my partner, can very well be a threat. So I am now more likely to be economically dependent on my partner since I got married young and I got off the career track, typically. And if another woman starts hanging around with my partner, I could very well lose my life and livelihood. Same thing if I'm a guy. If I'm investing all of my eggs in one family basket, I could be cuckolded, and there are pretty high fitness costs there. So other people's ability to pursue their sexual freedoms is a threat to me if I'm a restricted strategist. And from the point of view that they can affect my fitness, then yeah, I'm going to care about their ability to pursue their sexual freedoms. And the best way to curtail their ability to pursue their sexual freedoms and mitigate the threat to me is to increase the costs of casual sex, which I can do really well if I restrict safe and legal abortions, and if I restrict things like birth control.
Or divorce for that matter, but put a high cost on leaving partners and from a societal perspective.
And I think that there's one other point to potentially make here, which is that it's not just about the interlopers kind of hanging around, foiling your sexual strategy, your more sort of sexually conservative strategy. But it's also about the institutions, the sort of societal institutions that you want to be in place in order for you to enact your strategy more easily. And so if marriage as an institution, people start to feel like it's being degraded by the fact that promiscuous people are getting married, and that's what a lot of people think, that homosexual people are promiscuous. We've actually documented that in some of our work. And when they think that, and they're sexually restricted, they're really opposed to same-sex marriage. And so you can think about other social institutions as well. So things like providing assistance for babies so that moms can work, providing things like, rooms for moms to pump or breastfeed, or providing on-site childcare. And Jaimie, we have to read that quote. I can pull it up. I'll pull it up. Jaimie just sent me this quote yesterday, and she's like, "Oh, okay, well, more, yet more." Let me find it.
Well, why, while you're doing that, why?
Here it is, right here. Charlie Shepard. So Idaho State Representative said he voted against federal funds to increase early childhood education because, quote, any bill that makes it easier or more convenient for mothers to come out of the home and let others raise their child, I don't think that's a good direction for us to be going. And no doubt he was in favor of overturning Roe v. Wade as well.
Right.
So there's like sort of like this constellation of attitudes that people have that are all about, where they fall on the spectrum of being okay with casual sex versus not being okay with casual sex, and then being, sort of more in line with the traditional family, because of all of the constraints that starting a family early and foregoing, opportunities for professional advancement, especially for women, that they're sort of locked into that pattern.
Now, oh man. Too many questions. One, when you mentioned things like restricting, say, public nursing or something like that, how does that fit in? I guess I'm not connecting the dot.
No, it's not public. It would be in the workplace, because it would be something that would enable moms to work. And if you are wedded to the traditional male as the breadwinner, woman is staying home with the family, then that's a threat. That kind of an institutional, support for women to do both, have babies and pursue career, is threatening to people who pursue that very conservative strategy.
Sorry.
Yeah,
Jaimie, please.
We should probably say that one of the advantages of this explanation is that it resolves a lot of the really awkward contradictions that exist in the explanations people say out loud, right? So whether you're on the left and you're talking about privacy, or you're on the right and you're talking about, well, I want to restrict access to abortion because of the sanctity of life, but I also am in favor of the death penalty. And I'm also in favor of, restricting access to birth control, which would prevent unwanted pregnancies and abortions. And these things seem really screwy. They shouldn't hang together. But from an evolutionary perspective, of course, if sexually restricted people are in power and can shape their institutions in ways that benefit their small group, they'll do it. And what will benefit their small group is raising the costs of sex, which disproportionately affects women because of these biological asymmetries that I imagine you all have talked about a lot on the show. So restricting abortion and banning birth control.
So some of this hypocrisy in the way that people are verbalizing these are the points that you're hearing on the news, which we go, well, if life is so important, child care doesn't, oh my gosh.
How come you don't care about them after they're born?
Child support doesn't start at the moment of conception. The ex or whatever doesn't start paying for child support the moment the woman is pregnant, and these sorts of peculiar hypocrisies, and they can kind of be resolved by thinking about it in a different way, of thinking that maybe these are just a lot of subconscious drives that we have, and these various strategies that most of us aren't privy to, and we have all of these evolved features in our minds that we just started learning about a couple hundred years ago, really, and a lot of people haven't caught up to. And all of us in every day of our lives are primed in all of these various ways that we have no idea that passing this person in the street made us behave in this certain way. But if you ask a person why they behaved in a certain way, we always come up with an explanation. And the brain consciousness loves to tell us the story of like, oh, I know exactly why I did that. And here's a long list of explanations.
There's a great term for that in the English language. It's called confabulation.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
so you're like, I don't know why. I'm going to come up with something though. And then that's where you find out that there are those awkward contradictions that Jaimie mentioned, because people will say, oh, it's because of the sanctity of life. But they also voted for, the death penalty.
And you wouldn't put a baby in prison, but you'll put a pregnant woman in prison. And there's all of this. It does get very lost in these foggy philosophical ideas of when does life actually start. And I think that fogginess is sort of an advantage for political parties because it takes things out of the realm of the known and the testable and things that we have evidence for, and just kind of allows people to say like sort of whatever they want about anything they want to validate their own perspective. What are the advantages for someone that what's the other sexual strategy called? Is that even like a open sexual strategy or something, or is that
the jargon that gets used in the literature is restricted versus unrestricted?
Now, how in what ways are restrictive people a threat to unrestricted people outside of, like, from an evolutionary perspective, outside of the laws that we're seeing today, which are quite obvious?
It's a good question.
It seems like kind of one-sided.
It's a little asymmetrical. I think you're right.
Yeah.
I don't know, Jaimie, do you have thoughts on that?
So with Jordan Moon and a few other people, we talked a little bit about this, and what Martie's saying is right. I mean, it is pretty asymmetrical here. There can, of course, be threats when you're not letting me pursue the behavior that I could be great at. But, it really is kind of one-sided for now until we can come up with better theories and get better evidence.
Yeah, I mean, if women are, but you can think about this at the institutional level. If women are paid less than men and there's not a push to make sure that there's wage equity, if there's not a push to enable women to go to school and pursue higher education, if we didn't have Title IX, right, which is some 50th anniversary of Title IX, K can't be 50. Is that right? Anyway, so if those things aren't in place, then women they don't have the option to pursue the strategy of foregoing reproduction and pursuing professional advancement. And for men, I suppose if the short-term strategists amongst men, so there's multiple things going on here. There's pursuing career and engaging in more casual relationships to start. But there's also, in some people, there's just a real drive to have short-term relationships. And that's probably more true for men than for women. If men, observe their environment and the responses to them from others, which suggest that they can pursue a short-term mating strategy. So if they're very sexy guys, then that can influence their motivation, because they were like, well, I guess I can do that thing, which, throughout evolutionary history would have resulted in more offspring. If you could do that thing and you did do that thing, then you would not want institutions to restrict your ability to do that. So it goes in both ways, but I think that the first direction that we talked about is the one that's a little bit more obvious from this perspective.
Certainly better studied.
I don't see a lot of unrestricted sexual strategists out there telling people,
you can't get married.
You can't get married or something like that.
That's a good point.
Certainly you might try to poach a mate or something like that, but outside of that, and so kind of going back to this is. Obviously, we've talked about this a fair amount on the show, but again, to set this up these differing kind of sex differences in mating strategies. If a guy is on an island with 100 women, it could result in 100 babies in a year. If a woman's on an island with 100 guys, it can result in 1 baby a year and probably 99 dead guys. And so there's very differing strategies typically that we can see in lots of species. That's pretty ubiquitous in most of the species on Earth, and there's lots of interesting and when you get down to it, some basic like the 101 ideas of that are fairly basic ideas that seem to drive a lot of how evolution has worked in most species.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And when I lecture, when I give undergraduate lectures on this stuff, I show a newspaper clipping, which tells you how old this thing was, because it was actually in the newspaper, about Sooty, the hamster. And Sooty escaped from his pen and got into the female pen. They had them separated for good reason. They're rodents, I guess, they were going to reproduce rapidly. Anyway, Sooty got into the other pen and he mated with all of the females. And then they couldn't find him. So they thought, oh my gosh, this little guy escaped. I guess it was at a zoo. The little guy escaped, and they're searching around for him everywhere. And then they find him asleep in the middle of the female's pen, right? And he'd mated with all of the females. And then all of those females went on to have babies that were Sooty's babies. And then they put Sooty back, and then he was totally depressed.
Yeah, in a coma for a while.
Yeah.
And because from an alien anthropologist perspective, you think, well, this rodent that's in a cage, what it wants is freedom. If only it could escape and be in the wild. And no, it just wants all of those females
it got into the other cage.
Right.
And all of these lofty ideas come back to the biology, and to come back to something that you said, Shane, about, deciding when a clump of cells is a person, doing that philosophically or morally or religiously. And sure, you could do that on your own and have your own opinion, but doing it scientifically is the only humane and sane way to make any decisions. And so I think doing it because, a book said X is a little bit of a bad way to decide, especially if I'm not part of your book club.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I was raised Catholic. I was raised in a super strict religious household, and man, it didn't go well for me. I didn't like it, I think. And so, early on in life, I would have been, like, man, a lot of these people just suck so much. But as I've gotten older and learned so much more, it's interesting to find out all of the complexity and nuance behind why these people suck.
I cannot say,
from your
perspective.
It might be a little
from your perspective as an unrestricted sexual strategist.
First off,
is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It might be some confirmation bias going on here. That's a solid joke. I led you one way, I took it another. Come on. All right. So what about? How about some of your? Let's get into some actual studies that would maybe explain some of the things that we're talking about. And again, you guys are in your world. That's different than the world that my audience is in. So I wouldn't be overly concerned about this old trite study about. Now I'm trying to think of the Florida one with asking women.
Clark and Hatfield?
Oh,
yeah. The Clark and Hatfield study. Things like
Hatfield.
That. My audience doesn't know every one of those off the top of the head, like the people that you guys would know. So could you offer some of the studies that maybe would show some build kind of the structure of build some evidence toward this point of view that you're taking?
So can we start with some unpublished data? hot off the presses kind of stuff. Is that allowed?
Yeah, go for it. I
Sure.
want to hear. I want to hear.
So I'll tell you some of the data that we have, and then Martie can get into some of the incredible published work that she has. So I'll tell you what's not driving it, and she'll tell you what is. My colleague Jordan Moon, who's about to be a postdoc at the Institute of Advanced Study at Toulouse, and I said, these people say it's the sanctity of life. And as scientists, we say, well, you also support the death penalty and you're against birth control, so that's probably, I don't believe you. But we wanted to give that a fair shake and actually test it. So we created an experiment, and we randomly assigned people who varied in the extent to which they believed abortion was murder to read one of 3 different scenarios about a bill. And in all of it, they reported their support for a bill. And in all the bills, it would cost X billion dollars and save, essentially, to the extent, again, you believe a clump of cells is a life, 1 million lives over 10 years or something like that. All of that was kept constant. So if you believe that abortion is murder and you want to protect innocent life, then based on existing evidence and knowledge and based on that argument, you should want to. So the more you believe abortion is murder, the more that you should want to support a bill that punished women for having abortions. So prevented abortion, saved 1 million fetal lives that way. Support a bill that introduced birth control where it was needed most. So it would, and in the scenario it read, would prevent 1 million unwanted pregnancies that would end in abortion. So you're saving those lives. And you should also want to save newborn lives, right? So these babies are just born, but they lack the critical care and provisioning to survive. We're going to give them that care. And so instead of dying, these 1 million newborns are going to live. And what we find is that the more that you believe abortion is murder, which co-varies really strongly with being a restricted sexual strategist, the more that you believe abortion is murder, the more that you support a bill that says, I'm going to punish women for having abortions. The more that you believe abortion is murder, the less you support giving critical care to newborns and preventing their dying. The less you support giving birth control to people and preventing unwanted pregnancies that would end in abortion. So that is in line with an evolutionary explanation, and it's really strongly contrary to the sanctity of life explanations. But I think Martie has data that can really hammer home it's a sexual strategies thing.
Jaimie, I have a question. Go ahead, Shane, and then I have a question.
It's just simply imposing a cost on these people in any way that, if you're a restrictive sexual person, in any way that you can impose any kind of a cost on an unrestricted sexual person.
It's really a strange paranoia. It's like, really the unrestricted people on the college campus down the street are going to invade your religious institution. And it's weird. It's really strange. I mean, I suppose that what we have is kind of an evolutionary mismatch that's happening here too, because usually the people whose behavior you knew about were local. They were like with you. Whereas now we can know about people on the other side of the planet. And there's no chance that those people are going to be interlopers on your marriage, right? They're not going to come in and separate you and your partner, attract one or the other individual away. And so, but because we evolved in small groups, and when we heard about other people's behavior, they were part of our local environment, and so we've kind of extrapolated it to this broad, weirdly into this broad set of. So the institutions thing is a little bit separate, but in terms of like the direct threat that those people might pose, they're not a direct threat. So it's extra irrational.
We evolved to gather social information, and it's just the ways in which we do that has changed drastically. But it's still now. I mean, getting social information from your TV about what's going on halfway around the world is, on some levels, still not that from just a bare bones biological wiring that's been around for 100 to 400,000 years in humans.
That's right.
It's not, on some levels, it's not that different. It's just where you're getting that information from has changed. And what hasn't changed is how it influences you and how important you perceive it to be.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe.
Yeah. Jaimie, I have a question for you about your data, and you may or may not be able to tell me the answer to this, but I'm wondering, are there people who are principled? Are there people who
Yeah.
so
individual
you told us about the general patterns, but like, are there people, because I think there probably are people out there who are like the sanctity of life, they're monks or something.
Sure
I mean, I don't know who they are. I don't think that they're the
James.
people who are making the decisions in Washington, but they could be out there, right? There could be people who do have that principled stance, the sanctity of life, and that dictates, and anyway, any evidence of that in Oklahoma?
So none of these data are about Oklahoma necessarily, and I am an untenured faculty member. We'll have you know.
Okay, sorry. Yes.
No. So what we'd have to do is look individual by individual, and it wouldn't be hard to explore that. I think
just
you're
wonder
right
if
that they do exist.
could you organize things into four quadrants where like there's like the people who are contradicting. They're the people who are consistent, and then there are people who are inconsistent with the sanctity of life.
Yes,
and you could kind of have like,
we could just code them.
Pro sanctity of life, anti sanctity of life. But then there's people who say that that's what they think, but then they're consistent. And there's people who say that's what they think, but they're
So we'd have to do that in another study where we present all of these possibilities to them, which we could easily do, and then code them for, like you're saying, consistency or not. But I mean, I believe they're there. I believe also, like you're saying, they're few and far in between.
Yeah. I mean, individual differences apply a lot, and some of it's painting with broad strokes here. I mean, I think that to say everyone that's against abortion is like thinking illogically or something like that, or is a hypocrite or something would be wrong. Even if we have these wonderful findings that show this general kind of priming effect from these things that we should all become more aware of. But we're also all hypocrisy detectors as well. So
and we're all hypocrites.
We're like. And we're all hypocrites. So we all find, certainly, if a pregnant woman is murdered and that's taken into consideration that she was pregnant, or if someone, abuses a pregnant woman and she loses that child, and that is taken into consideration in the eyes of the law. I mean, I think that's a pretty logical and seems like a reasonable thing as well.
These people aren't in their like Machiavellian church apses saying, how can we mess up the unrestricted sexual strategist? This is a non-conscious motivation, one that probably even carried them to religion, which I imagine Martie will want to talk about later. So it's not that they're trying to hurt people. It's not that they're trying only it's only men trying to control women. This is a non-conscious behavior to build the world in a way that benefits me.
And I think it's gut level feeling, right? Because so people, that's why when you ask people, they come up with an explanation, but it's not necessarily, but then it'd be inconsistent with other things that they believe, right? And which suggests that that's not really the true explanation. And so it's this like, sort of gut level reaction. People are like, I just think that's wrong. I just don't think that this should be available to women. I don't think that, and maybe you could also ask them questions about, people having casual sex, and you get very similar responses, but they're not going to necessarily connect those things. I think that's a really important
I don't
point,
know what consciousness
Jaimie.
is like in other animals, of course, but human consciousness is such an amazing confabulator and such an exaggerative machine and a storyteller. And you can ask me why I bought a candy bar from the convenience store, and I'll spin some grand story about how today was special, and I earned that candy bar. And this was we all do this just constantly, all of the time. It's very, very difficult to avoid. And do you guys both say non-conscious, by the way? Because when I say non-conscious to most people that aren't scientists, they're like, huh? Do scientists generally say non-conscious? I prefer it. Sub makes it seem lesser, and on makes it seem like someone knocked you out or something.
Non-conscious. I think non-conscious is less of a commitment than saying unconscious, because unconscious means that it's like there's a little story in there, but you can't get to it. Right. It's like a very Freudian kind of notion that you've got like this unconscious mind that's doing its thing and it's got its own story that it's spinning. Whereas when it's an evolutionary explanation, you're saying it's non-conscious. It just means that you're not privy to the evolutionary logic behind it, which is almost always the case. We can sort of like puzzle it out as scientists, but we don't know. We don't know what drives us. We don't know what the sort of like fitness logic or evolutionary logic is behind things. And that stuff is not required for us to have that gut level reaction that we have it somewhere stored in our heads. So we don't have to have that story that, oh, well, it's to avoid casual, to avoid those, scary interlopers who are going to destroy my strategy. That doesn't need to be anywhere in your head. All that needs to be in your head is a connection between the strategy that you are pursuing and a gut level feeling that you don't like what somebody else is doing.
Right.
And you don't have to know anything about the logic of it. It doesn't need to be stored in your head anywhere. It just, those are the forces that created the gizmo in your head that gives you that gut reaction. But nowhere in that gizmo in the head is the evolutionary logic that, is a history of why it is that gizmo was formed.
Nor is doubting it helping a lot of individuals on a social level, a lot of times. So, lack of confidence or questioning things from an individual level isn't always favored in the workplace or in family life or attracting mates or friends or whatever else. So it's always interesting to me that
I want to know whether Jaimie agrees with that, though. Jaimie, do you agree that saying non-conscious is sort of less of a commitment?
Yeah,
we're just saying you don't know, whereas unconscious means it's in there somewhere.
You don't need to know. I am against the unconscious stuff, the Freudian stuff, the little Cartesian theater that there's a guy in my head like Men in Black running me around. That's not how evolution built us, and It's like we're all split brain patients, and part of our brain saw a chicken and part of our brain saw a shovel, and we're making an explanation up about what the heck is going on. And I should say I'm cribbing this all from Rob Kurzban's book.
That's a good metaphor. Actually.
Why Everyone Else is a Hypocrite, which Shane, if you haven't read that, you should absolutely read that, because it touches on hypocrisy and why sort of everything that comes out of our mouth is like a PR module. We want to argue, we want to be right, we want to show how confident we are. And if in, some other part of our brain that our PR module doesn't have access to, we actually, that part of our brain knows that we're really bad at something, but our PR module says, look how great I am. I mean, the PR module is going to benefit us. So.
I mean, when you detect hypocrisy in others, it's just glaring and it's infuriating, and it just stands out so much, and that's so much of our conscious debates is having this like hypocrisy off, where I guess it's kind of what I like a lot. I'm glad that you brought the hypocrisy into the debate, but it's nice to see that there's ways of working around it to see deeper drives that are influencing all of this that go beyond like, why is this person a hypocrite? And why is this person a hypocrite? And there's just deeper things happening. Could I ask, what if we forgot about mating? Like, what if we considered that mating itself was a confound in the abortion debate, which it can't be. I mean, this is mating is such a huge part of our life. But what if I expanded more generally to we talk about kind of personality differences and stuff on the show sometimes: conscientiousness, agreeableness, neuroticism, extroversion, openness. And everyone evolved to be kind of all over the place, but there's kind of a reason why there's limits on the spectrum. Most people fall in the middle. People higher in openness tend to be a little more okay with ambiguity and adventure and new experiences. People that are lower in it tend to follow traditions and tend to, this can predict some political views as well. And there's all sorts of good evolutionary reasons why people would have evolved to be on this spectrum, and why sometimes people would take too many chances and pay a high cost for that. Other people wouldn't take enough chances and pay a high cost for that. But can this, when you talk about how people are for the death penalty that are also against abortion, and restricted versus non-restrictive, does some of this just fall into a predisposition toward a fondness or aversion from kind of ambiguity and predictability and control in life?
Probably not, because it changes over the lifespan in pretty systematic ways that make sense with an evolutionary explanation. So when people get married and have kids, and it benefits them to pursue this more restricted lifestyle, so they are then more likely to find religion. So if you look at religion longitudinally, people pursue religion when they become more restricted, and not vice versa. Same thing, there's some work from Nick Carey, who's a postdoc at UPenn, and a whole team with Damien Murray at Tulane, that says the more children you have in particular. So there's one idea that people become politically conservative because they get older and wiser. Shane, your face.
I was trying to keep a poker face because you blew my mind a moment ago. So why don't you continue, and I have some follow-up questions.
So yeah, there's some work that essentially, if you look across cultures, across nations, if you have kids, and the more kids you have, so the more effort you're putting into parenting and have to put into parenting, the more politically conservative you become. So these things track and ebb and flow in predictable ways that are probably not, stable trait dispositions.
And grandparents tend to be more loose, and when you're the kid, they're the ones that aren't as restrictive, and because they don't have as high of. Older people tend to get more conservative anyway, but in the specific context of it, being one generation detached, they get to be like the fun, looser one.
Not my baby, but she was a bitch.
A lot of that conflicts. Probably everything that I just said is wrong when I look at it from a different point of view, actually, now that I think about it. But could you talk, I would love to hear your perspective, Jaimie, about this religious correlation, and what's happening there.
Folks like Jason Whedon, Jordan Moon, Rob Kurzban, obviously Martie, who's right here, and some others have discussed the possibility, Doug Kenrick, of this sort of reproductive religiosity model. So religions are weirdly obsessed with virginity, fertility, and fidelity. And given that they're so concerned about sex, maybe they're telling us some things about sex. Okay, yeah, they are. And maybe people are supporting religion or promoting religion because it forces other people to adhere to their restricted mating strategies. So that is one of the ideas that seems to suggest that it's not religion teaching us what sexual strategy we should have, but rather our sexual strategies leading us to prefer, disfavor things like religion that help us further our sexual strategies. Did that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. It's just, just at the same time that it makes sense, it also just like, I have a hard time paying attention because my brain's just always in a wash of past memories from my childhood and various traumas of my upbringing that I have to remember in a new, reframed way.
See, I would have thought like you look like a Quaker school kid, and I say that as someone that went to Quaker school. So,
yeah, Catholic. I mean, and my parents were I know they were super strict, but they were by by a lot of other standards, like exceptional parents in terms of providing. I had a very like white picket fence kind of. A white picket house would be amazing, actually. How come no one's done that? I haven't seen a white picket house before. Why have the fence at all? All right, Martie, I was so concerned I wasn't going to talk to Jaimie enough because Martie and I talk all the time. We're good friends. But going back to, you're going to share some of the studies, rather.
Yeah. Yes. So Jaimie already mentioned some data collected by other folks that I find quite compelling that shows that the causal arrow probably goes from, and so the model is called the reproductive religiosity model. And the idea is that this is a particular social institution that helps to support people pursuing this strategy. And so, longitudinally, it looks like it's the sexual strategy that precedes, and the sexual, and, and having kids, for example, that precedes greater conservatism and greater religiosity. So the data that we have, so what we have published pertains to same-sex marriage, but I think that the model will also apply to abortion. And we have some preliminary data that suggests that it does. And so for same-sex marriage, what we found, and I sort of alluded to this earlier, but what we found was that people who had the more conservative mating strategy, this more restrictive mating strategy, and who thought that people who are gay are promiscuous. So both of those things had to be true. If both of those things were true, right? And so they were more opposed to gay marriage. And so gay marriage becomes a threat if you think that the institution is being degraded by promiscuous people getting married. That's exactly what we found, and we found it both in terms of what people told us. They're we could just ask them explicitly, like, how promiscuous do you think homosexual people are? And so they would responded on their questionnaire, and they also told us about their sexual strategy. And if both of those things went in that direction, then they were more opposed to same-sex marriage. But we also demonstrated at the implicit level. So people who could respond more quickly on a computerized task to associations between promiscuity and homosexuality. And I don't want to get into the details of the task, but I could try if you're interested. It's called the implicit association task. But when people, and so when people are quicker to respond to pairings that are consistent with that, as opposed to inconsistent with that, that suggests that they have a connection between those concepts in their head. And even at the implicit level, measuring that and then asking them about their sexual strategy, if those two things both go in the direction of thinking that gay people are promiscuous and also being, pursuing this sort of more restrictive sexual strategy, then people are more opposed to same-sex marriage. So how's that going to apply to abortion? I guess I can talk about unpublished data, since Jaimie did as well. These are also data from David Pinsoff's dissertation, so they're public in some way. But we're actually pursuing a follow-up study, and we're going to pursue this because we think it's really interesting.
Sorry, I love this
Pinsoff,
work.
He's amazing.
Oh, him, yes, I love him, but also like your work together, that paper.
Oh, thank you.
Thesis data, I love
it's all
this
him.
Stuff.
It's all him. He was amazing.
You guys are
he's amazing. And Pinsoff, you should have him on the show, Shane, if you haven't. He's one of the inventors of Cards Against Humanity. So he did not pursue his academic career, because I go into Target and there's a whole wall of Cards Against Humanity games. And so he's doing that, and he's doing some other intellectual work.
What a good egg.
But when he was in graduate school working with me, he did the same-sex marriage study. He also collected data that showed that to the extent that people think that the existence of abortion enables people to engage in casual sex, right? So it assists people in their pursuing their casual sex strategy. So not everybody's going to believe that, or people's attitudes about that are going to be stronger or weaker. I mean, I actually believe that Sure, I actually believe that that's the case, that if abortion exists, people are freer to have casual sex. The use of contraception makes people freer to have
I think
casual sex.
everyone knows babies are expensive, right? Like everyone kind of gets that there's some cost there on some some level.
Yes, but if the cost is so prohibitive that if you can't escape it, then you don't do it. Then that works in favor of folks who want to have the world be more sexually restricted. Right. So what our preliminary data show is that people who think that those attitudes enable casual, or the existence of those
technologies,
the existence of abortion,
like
the existence of contraception, yes, the existence of these things enables casual sex, and they are sexually restricted, then they are even more. Then those are the people who are most opposed to abortion existing. Yes. So anyway, we got to follow it up, and we'll see.
So
we'll see whether
I think
that pans out again.
Martie's stuff and Martie and David Pinsoff's stuff would say together, in line with this evolutionary view, anything that these restricted strategists associate with promiscuity, they are going to oppose. And
that's right.
Probably, so we've started to put together a long list of these things. Things like drag queen story hour and what books kids can read and wage equality that are not necessarily intimately related to sexual behavior, but linked to people's ability to, pursue lives outside of these long-term reproductive careers. I think I would put money on that as a finding. There are some things that I really would bet on that we got right. Yeah. And I think Martie got this one right.
Yep. I think we're going to find that. We're launching some new work to try and establish that and see whether we can document it across the United States. So we'll see. But not all conservatives, not all of the sort of stuff that conservatives are in favor of should go with these attitudes. And so what were the exceptions that we came up with, Jaimie? Now I'm trying to remember.
State tax, gun control, perhaps.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. So like a state tax.
So there are other conservative attitudes that shouldn't travel so tightly with all of these things that enable people to pursue their sexual strategies.
So why in the world does being against abortion mean that predictably you are more likely to own guns or be for gun rights or whatever? It's a bizarre sort of, again, hypocrisy, I suppose.
My best guess there comes from that work from Nick Carey and Damian Murray and company, suggesting that the people who are more conservative are also more worried about these sort of external threats to mortality and getting bumped off. So maybe this threat translates into wanting to arm themselves, especially to protect, their families. That's my best guess, but I don't know.
I mean, going back to the thing that you told me I was wildly wrong about, which is personality differences.
Just talk to Aaron Lukashevsky about personality, and I think your mind will be blown.
I would love to, but it seems like there's a little bit of one directionality going on. As someone that was raised around people that were very kind of in groupy, it's like you care so much about the Vikings because you're a Packer fan, and like the Vikings fans are just the worst. And I was always like, why does anyone care about any of this? And the only cost I ever put on them was like my indifference toward the thing that they cared about, whereas they would happily fight someone in a bar because they were wearing a different sport team hat or whatever. That was my experience growing up, and to me, I'm sure I'm confounding all sorts of stuff, but it doesn't seem unrelated. it seems like there is a little bit going on here with a need for control and like a need for predictability, just generally as a disposition, which also could maybe lead to restrictive mating strategies as well, right? Like, aren't restrictive mating strategies just more predictable? Like, if you are married and there is this bond that you cannot get out of, that's a more predictable thing that you have control over. I don't know.
People make a distinction between being fiscally conservative and socially conservative. And I think that maps onto what we're talking about here, that you can be one, but not the other.
Right.
And I know lots of people who would say, oh, I'm conservative, but not about the social issues. It's just, concerned about my finances. And really, it's just concerned about the money that they have, not wanting to give it up.
Right. I love the idea of you don't meet... There's going to be someone that's going to become a celebrity who is socially conservative and fiscally liberal because it doesn't exist. And it would be a very unique thing. The first person ever to be that.
That's a good point. I mean, so you can be fiscally conservative, but not socially conservative. But can you be socially? Yeah, I think you're right, Shane. I don't see that. I don't see that happening.
It doesn't. Last little thing. What does kind of like, what does sort of power and ability have to do with it? Because we all have these drives. For example, if we were to talk about race or racism or something like that, just to like throw more gasoline on this fire, you could say that every single human should have a lot of these in and out group kind of features, but you could also say that people, whatever race and whatever region, whatever that perhaps has the most power in that potential environment, is able to express more of that like outgroup bias or something. And I feel like we're kind of seeing that a little bit right now with the Supreme Court decisions and things that are happening where, I mean, before Donald Trump was elected,
excuse me,
unexcusable, Martie. There's no sneezing on this show. I told you that before we hit record. Before Donald Trump was elected, for example, very few people had Donald Trump signs in their yard. It caught everyone by surprise. And then after, and it had the social validation or whatever. It was all this. I've never seen anything like it. Every truck stop, all the flags, all the Rambo flags and the signaling. I've never. I mean, imagine if I was like wearing a Joe Biden like jumpsuit and cape and stuff right now. Like how amazingly ridiculous that would look. But people just walk around wearing weird like Trump merch everywhere regularly, and it seems like they didn't feel very comfortable doing that before they had the power to do so. So do you think there's any of that kind of factoring into these drives and equations? Basically, if someone can get what they want, they're going to take it. And when they have more power to do so, they're going to do it. Whether that's you're an attractive mate or something, so you're able to get more out of your from your mating scenario, or you're the boss at the job and you're able to demand more out of your employees, and there's always these power dynamics going on in our social lives. Any thoughts?
I certainly agree with that, but I will say that we should remember probably that the majority of Americans, including the majority of Republicans, support some ability for women to have abortions, right? So it is a tiny fringe minority who just happen to sit on the Supreme Court right now or be in office, who have the power to dictate what most people can do. And most people want other people to be able to do this thing, this freedom, have this freedom that the Supreme Court now says, and well, or at least a lot of state legislators are allowed to say women can't have. So, I mean, I think part of that, and same thing with the Trump shirts, it revolves around common knowledge. The Trump people started that thing, wearing those shirts and jumpsuits and capes and whatever, because they realized, oh, there are a fuck ton of us, and we have more power than we thought we had, because there are more of us, that we have a bigger coalition. And I think once we start talking about and taking seriously women's rights and freedoms again, which we've been silent on for a while, because probably a lot of us thought it would never, like, how could this happen? Maybe we'll realize how big our coalition is and start to make some change, potentially. Or maybe we'll
if you
just
still
get
have
shot.
the right to vote.
I mean, yeah. Good Lord.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Yeah.
I don't know. I might be barefoot.
I'm
and
really
pregnant.
trying not to have this closed body language, but I keep catching myself.
I mean, it's horrible. It's a horrible thing.
I
that
called
has
my
happened to
mother
our country.
crying.
Yeah,
I called my
it's
mother crying.
ridiculous.
I was walking out of an exercise class and I heard the news,
Yeah, it's horrible.
listening to NPR, and I was like, "What?" I mean, even though we knew it was coming, it was just like
it's horrible.
And
Things can't.
the terrifying,
you know, I mean, and you know, and that it was Kavanaugh and Clarence Thomas. You know, these guys don't have the cleanest history.
I mean, they're
Yeah.
Of
friends
not
of
be-
women,
of-
right?
yeah, I mean, yeah, with women, and they're making those decisions for us. That's
Yeah.
fucked up. I'm sorry.
Well, again, that's the thing is I think that when it's very easy to impose laws on people that you yourself don't have to abide by. That's, again, a little
Right.
more.
Yeah, I know. I don't think men should be voting on this.
Yeah.
And
Period.
I will say more than the
Saves me a
affront,
trip to the voting.
more than the affront to my rights and humanity and respect and dignity, that this is. I'm a scientist, and it doesn't follow the science.
Yeah.
If you look at the
yeah.
Turnaway study, this amazing research that they followed 1,000 women. Some were denied, wanted abortions, others weren't. The women who were denied the abortions they wanted to have had worse outcomes on every metric. So first of all, the women who had abortions didn't regret it, which was something that I think Roberts once just assumed and wrote in one of the opinions.
Mhm.
And then the women
Mhm.
who wanted to have it and couldn't, there are other children, because most women who have abortions already have kids. Their other children didn't meet milestones when they should have. Those women were more likely to be in financial distress and beaten by their partners. And abortions are good for women. That's what the science tells us.
Right.
And so,
Of course. That's the perfect way to end. That is the perfect way to end. Yes. I can't pretend to be as frustrated as you are, but I'm very frustrated. And I'm exceedingly grateful that you guys decided to join me and share your science and your perspectives and make such interesting points. And I hope the audience learned a few things, because
Yeah. So, I mean, in essence, what we're saying is that the abortion debate is not what people say it's about. And it's about this other thing that people aren't even thinking about. And we're going to do our best to let people know about that.
and aren't going to. The people that you would like to know about that aren't going to take.
Well, there
the
might be some
time.
people in the middle who will find this. And I think,
right.
and I think liberals will find this actually, who are not aware of this perspective, and most people are not, because it's not that, Jaimie and I are kind of working in this little niche area here.
Right.
But I think
Right.
I think that people who are puzzled by all of this will find this perspective really helpful in figuring out, like, why is this happening? And then I think that will also be a call to action too. And I hope that, I try not to be political, but I really hope that this is the kind of thing that is going to energize people to get out and do something.
Yeah. Me too. Well, with that, thank you so much, Martie Haselton and Jaimie Krems, for joining me today. And thank you, listeners, for being such wonderful, curious people. We'll talk with you next week.